This meeting's being recorded. Is that okay? I'm not sure. Where's the I'm not sure button?
Anything you say can and will be used against you.
Boy, isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anytime we put a conversation out into the wild, you never know how it's going to land for people.
Yeah,
But we
I
just got to,
know.
it's more
Hang
important
on.
to do it, I think,
Let
than
me
to
get
worry
this.
about it. Douglas Gillette, it's a real pleasure to meet you today and have you on the podcast.
Likewise, Brian. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks for showing up. And I was really excited to see that you've got a new book coming out. Like I was saying before we started recording, you've been this kind of mysterious figure on the back of a book that's meant a lot to me over the years, King, Warrior,
Right.
Magician, Lover, that you co-wrote or collaborated on with Robert Moore.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, I've never really heard your story. And Robert Moore was a very extroverted, big personality, so he was really out there after that book, and so a lot of people associate that work with him. But I've always been curious, who's this other bearded man on the back cover of this book? And so I hope like we could start just by talking a little bit about that, because for a lot of people listening, that might be the entryway into, talking about the rest of your work.
Sure. Uh, how many years ago was that? 34, I think, 35 when we started writing. Well, I went to Chicago Theological Seminary for my M.Div degree, specifically because Robert Moore was there.
Hmm.
And I was told, I hadn't ever met him, but I was told that he uh, looked at Christianity through a Jungian lens. And I was very interested in that. I'd been into depth psychology for several years, and so I went. I met him. He became my mentor, and I think it's true to say that I became basically his star student. And okay, so I graduated. I had a church and in the Chicago area, and a couple of years after I'd graduated, Robert called me and he said, do you want to write a book together? I said, okay, about what? And I was not in men's work at all at that point,
Hmm.
in any kind of direct way. It was a part of the Jungian analysis I was getting at the time, but it wasn't the focal point. So anyway, I said, okay. And so he said it's about the male psyche. Okay. So then we started having a series of meetings, and I started watching his tapes of his lectures and that sort of thing. And so I got up to speed pretty fast. We decided on the voice together, and I'll never forget. Of course, he had worked out the king, warrior, magician, lover
Hmm.
archetypes first. And he'd done a little bit of work on the shadows of those archetypes, especially the king. Uh, and after I'd studied the material and we'd had some conversations, I'll never forget, we're sitting in a cafe in Hyde Park in Chicago. I said, you know what, Robert? I think these these shadows are bipolar. There's a quote unquote strong side and a weak side, or an overexpressed side and an underexpressed side.
Yeah, I sometimes think active and passive.
Yeah, active and
Hmm.
passive. Yeah. Um, and and there was just stunned silence as we're sitting at the table there. He said, yeah, okay. Huh. How does that work? I said, I'm not sure. But we started to name them, and and then I started working with it. So my main contribution to the system was the bipolar shadow
Hmm.
of each of the archetypes, and of course the voice of the book. So yeah, and then we didn't even have to write a book proposal. I just sent a one paragraph letter to Harper San Francisco at the time, and with a general idea of what this was going to be, what we were planning. They immediately accepted it,
Hmm.
and you know why? That's because Iron John was coming out, Robert Bly's Iron
Hmm.
John, not with Harper San Francisco, and they wanted a competitive book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so
So
so we,
there was already like a buzz about this men's movement and
yes, there
probably
was. Yeah.
magazine articles and
Mm.
stuff about it.
I don't know how much media, there was some media,
Hmm.
um, but Robert Bly and then Rich Tosi and some other guys had started a, a kind of, it was more than primary or more than sort of a model. They developed a bit the New Warrior Training Network. That
Hmm.
had started a couple years or so before we wrote King Warrior Magician
Oh,
Lover.
really? I
Yeah.
could have sworn that came out after, like, inspired by King Warrior Magician Lover.
Well, what happened was no, the men's work had begun
Hmm.
here and there, and that's part of what inspired Robert. With the King Warrior Magician. I mean, there was some kind of synergy there before the book came out. Anyway, once the book came out, all kinds of men's organizations. It wasn't just the Mankind Project that became, the dominant one. But in those days, there were a bunch of things, the men's room and this and that and the other thing. And they all pretty much adopted King Warrior Magician along with Robert Bly's Iron John as sort of the Old Testament and the New Testament, right, of the
Hmm.
men's movement. Uh, and especially as the years passed, I think King Warrior Magician Lover became the basic Bible because
Hmm.
it was more than, of course, as you know, a collection of stories to illustrate Robert's and my emphasis on structure. You have
Hmm.
to get a hold of structure. You have to see it, and then you start working with it along basically Jungian lines in order to rearrange the furniture and the unconscious for a man and, you know, uh, become initiated. If you're doing the work, really become initiated into a new way of being a man.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of it as initiating yourself into fuller capacities of what it means
Yeah,
to be a man or what's possible for men.
right, right.
And I
Yeah.
think, like, for me, why it's been so enduring and remains a foundational text for the men's work that I do with individual men,
Mm,
is that the structure really helps. It's a great starting point to
yeah.
help get a sense of the psyche and the different aspects of the psyche. It brings in images and stories, so it's immediately grasped. We're not talking about abstract psychological concepts like the
Right.
complexes and things. So it's grounded in image, it's grounded in story, and I think that seems to really help men get into a more psychological way of thinking. And but it can't end there. For me, like, it's a great place to start, but
Mhm.
it can't turn into a kind of program, you know?
Right. Yeah, we meant it as the stories, by the way, from all kinds of diverse sources. Of course, are intended to catch men who are living stories themselves that may be similar, or the stories in the book may evoke memories of embodied memories of episodes in their own lives and so forth. Once you get the story, then you can introduce some theory or some structure, and then more story, and so forth. So it was intended to do exactly what you're saying.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Now, uh, there's the book that everybody knows, the little blue book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. But there was also larger books associated with
Yeah,
each of the archetypes.
yeah.
Those have been like near impossible for me to find up here in Canada. But I know,
Anywhere,
yeah.
anywhere, really.
So was there a fuller book done for each one of the archetypes, or was that arrested at some point?
No, there were. I wrote four books with some of Robert's contribution too. The King Within, the Warrior Within, the Magician Within, the Lover Within. Yeah, and that was they were published by William Morrow.
Hmm.
They wanted the four books out within within a year, or was it
Wow.
2 years? I don't know. Anyway, that's all I did was write,
Hmm.
research and write and research and write and so on. Yeah, they go into much greater depth. And Morrow wanted a little more academic style,
Hmm.
which just between you and me and the audience, I thought was probably a mistake,
Yeah.
but that's what they wanted.
Hmm.
So that's what I wrote. And at any rate, they sold pretty well, but William Morrow did not put the publicity, the marketing into the four books that Harper San Francisco put into the first one. I
Hmm.
mean, I for the first one, I was on the road doing interviews and this and that and this and that and book signings all over the country, a little bit in Canada, Alberta, for it altogether was like 4 weeks, three
Hmm.
weeks straight, a week off, and then hit the road again. Nothing for the Morrow books,
Hmm.
the William Morrow books. And, you know, uh, so they sold fairly well, but not well enough. And the rights reverted to me and to Robert's heirs.
Hmm.
So they're sitting there, and we have tried various ways to get them republished. Actually, two were republished. I think it was The King Within, well, The King Within and The Magician Within, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, those
By
are the
by
ones that are easiest to find.
yeah, by what's the name of the press? Anyway, it's the um, uh, Chicago Theological Seminary
Hmm.
press. And then they stopped. If you want, I'm not going to tell you the gory details, but
Yeah, yeah.
there were problems between Robert and Chicago Theological Seminary at the end, and especially the
Hmm.
publisher. So those things have been. I've got a couple of boxes of them upstairs. Uh, I so what is left on the market, way out of print now. What's left on the market is basically collector's items.
Hmm.
They're as collector's items and very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any interest in maybe putting them out in a collected edition or something?
I do, I do,
Hmm.
but uh and supposedly to keep going with this, the rights have reverted back from Chicago Theological Seminary to me and to Robert's heirs. The but who would publish it? It's fairly, I don't want to say it's academic, but it is more detailed or
Hmm.
more same basic
Dense.
principle,
Hmm.
but more somewhat more cerebral, I guess, maybe
Hmm.
than King Warrior Magician Lover. And I've been living my life in writing other books, and off and on trying to get somebody interested in republishing them.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, it's possible that I'm having a meeting with my publicist uh, and an editor, a very important editor, I guess, at the new HarperCollins, which I guess is Harper One now, they're
Hmm.
called, this Friday. and what we're going to do is try to negotiate a republication of the audio for King Warrior Magician Lover,
Hmm.
because there's this ancient version on cassette, that nobody. Yeah, so we're going to talk about digitalizing it and what that would look like. And uh, anyway, once that contact is really, if it gets firmed up and we're going to go on that, then I could probably talk to her, with my publicist, about that possibility that you're mentioning,
Hmm.
of republishing the four, maybe slimmed down a bit and
Hmm.
compressed into a single 300,000 page book.
Yeah, I mean, even to release them digitally, it'd be great to have access to them, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the King Within is, I mean, as a part of ancient history, it is out, in cassette. I don't think the others got recorded at all,
Hmm.
but
Oh, I meant like ebook format.
yeah, I know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Well, I will talk to her too about that Friday.
Yeah. Yeah.
See just how interested they may or may not be.
Yeah, because I know just anecdotally that there are guys who do want to kind of go deeper, you know, once they've had the
Yeah.
introduction, they want to go deeper. So yeah, I think there's an audience for it because this is
Mm.
like one of those evergreen books. It doesn't, I mean, some of the references in the original King Warrior Magician Lover are a bit outdated and could be refreshed. You know, talking about General Patton and things like that, that people,
Yeah,
guys
right.
coming up now are like, who?
Who is that? Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think the model is still like really solid. It's really helpful. And it just seems to kind of keep coming back. I mean, new generations are discovering it and finding something useful in it. So, um, uh, so you had a church at the time, you said. So
Mhm.
you're acting as a pastor, is that right?
I was. Yeah. I had five churches, over a period of 20 years. Um, just briefly, I have always been what I would describe as a universalist
Hmm.
Christian, or a Christian universalist. And that is that my core myth, or mythos, is, love and goodness are offered, love and goodness are rejected, love and goodness arise triumphant. And so that's sort of, but I have always, since the time I can remember, rejected exclusivistic and literalistic understandings of that mythos. Um, and so I, I'll be brutally honest. Um, my experience of most churches is that, to the extent that the congregation is thinking at all, they're thinking mostly along literalistic lines.
Yeah.
And my experience was always that, I've always been about opening minds and hearts to, wow, the, presence of the divine just sort of everywhere, and try. And I would say about 10% roughly of any congregation that I've served, and I don't mean to diss anybody or diss, it's just observation. About 10% of any given congregation were excited about the new vistas I was trying to open,
Hmm.
and new ways of understanding the Christian mythos as well as everybody else's, and to see it all as sort of one, but not in a vague or dispersed way, in a focused way. About 10% were excited, about 10% were really hostile, and the rest of them had no idea really why they were in church.
Mm-hmm.
uh,
I was going to
tradition.
say if I'd found a church where the pastor was thinking metaphorically and like with a approach to comparative religion and all of that and the universality,
Right.
that could have kept me in church, you know.
Well, right. Me too. I bailed out during confirmation class. I said, okay, this is just not going anywhere. I proposed in a confirmation class when I was young, that 11 or 12, that we were talking about angels. And I suggested, well, they may or may not present themselves as quote unquote forms or physical objects, but what if we thought of them as um, at least metaphors for divine self disclosures? I mean, my language wasn't quite that sophisticated at 11 or 12, but that was the idea. And the guy teaching the class, the junior pastor, said, "We're not talking like that in this class." I said, "Okay, goodbye." Yeah,
Yeah.
and remarkably, I don't know how it is in Canada, but here in the United States, uh, the so-called mainline churches, uh, which most of them, not all, most of them literalistic and so forth too, have just been overwhelmed increasingly by extremely conservative Catholics and evangelical Protestants.
Hmm.
And that, for the most part, is literalistic.
Hmm.
The world was created in 6 days, and Joshua stopped the sun in the sky in order to kill more people, and so forth. And little or no thought at all given to other people's religions unless it's to demonize them.
Hmm.
I spent about 10 years in Judaism, going to synagogue and temple and so forth, not completely regularly, but a lot. And I spent 5 months living in Israel on a kibbutz in the Negev desert. Uh, uh, I spoke, read, and wrote Hebrew, um, modern Hebrew, conversational Hebrew, as well as liturgy stuff. I decided for me there were problems for me in proceeding with that, so I came back home, and I spent about 10 years in intensive study of Islam, the Sufi stuff, but
Hmm.
also the legal schools and the philosophies, the philosophical schools, and and found a spiritual hero in Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi.
Hmm.
And my impression of the Sufis, a lot of them, there were different, as you know, branches and so on, was that uh, they were like Christians. I mean, in their love for God, I mean, it was not a legalistic thing or even primarily a ritual thing. It was
Hmm.
heart to heart, you know.
Yeah, I think of the Sufis as kind of like the bhakti yogis of
Yeah,
Islam.
yeah.
Hmm.
Bhakti
I
yogis
mean, the
or
music is such a big part of it, and it's very
right.
emotional. It's not
Yep.
the kind of staid hymnals of the Anglican Church, and it's very like
Which I
emotive and
like, by the way, too. I do
yeah.
like Anglican liturgy, and there's a beauty to it.
Hmm.
And so on, and you know, it can be transcendent. Depends on how you
Yeah.
experience it.
Mm.
But yeah, so uh, I was a pastor. I did a lot of pastoral counseling. I did my own life guide work for 20 some years in groups and small, or whatever we're allowed to call ourselves now.
Right. So it's
And
like a pastoral counseling kind of
it
thing.
was pastoral counseling I did both kind of
Hmm.
pastoral counseling and life guide or whatever stuff. And they were kind of merged. And, you know, the people in pastoral counseling who really wanted to go deeper, you know, I would go over and start doing life guide stuff.
Hmm.
Because some people in churches are not, um, it the life guide Jungian inspired, of course, but not just that. I was eclectic too. I used other Alice Miller and other things. Um, they're not. Uh, they weren't always ready to move from specifically Christian or biblical language to what I think of as deeper or more inclusive
Hmm.
language.
Yeah.
So, but it had a rich life of trying to do the impossible, reform the churches into more metaphorical, more you know direct spiritual relationship with God's kind of thing, and I did a lot of interfaith work, which I just alluded to, but there was more.
Hmm.
Uh, I worked with a Turkish Muslim group for a number of years, tried to integrate them into an alternative service at the church I was at then. And kind of, you know, the alternative services were colored by Sufi uh, liturgy and so forth, as well as Christian and some other things. But, you know, I think, Brian, that and I don't want to be a wet blanket here, but I think that my sense all my life, whether it was in whatever it was in theater, I was in theater as an actor, director, and so forth. Religion, theology, philosophy, uh, uh, cross. I built a community organization, about 60% black, 40% white, and many other things. But it's always seemed obvious to me that at a deep level, we are all each other, and that we should see that and experience that. And not that there be no differences of culture and ideology and so forth, but that they have soft edges instead of hard,
Hmm.
and that they can be celebrated as long as they have soft edges and not hard edges. Not in a quest to become, as individuals and individual communities, uh, all each other, but to understand that ultimately we are that, and we are expressing ourselves racially, ethnically, culturally, religiously, and so forth in versions of what it means to be human
Hmm.
that are ultimately compatible and can be honored,
Hmm.
as long as, again, there are soft edges instead of hard edges.
Right. Things are held lightly as kind of provisional identities and all of that.
Yeah, provisional, meaningful, not in any
Hmm.
way uh, not casual,
Yeah.
but not deadly serious either. Like, I know the truth
Yeah.
and you don't, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Hmm.
And that just seems to be my life experience at 76. Um, Most of my students still think of me as a kid because I teach older people. We have weekly
Oh, yeah.
book discussion groups
Mm.
and so forth. But at 76, I feel like I have a lot of background in primate ethology too. I believe that we are other than or more than animals, but we are animals. And specifically, we are chimpanzees with
Mm.
exploded forebrains and so forth. Um, and looking at the progress, the lack of it actually, of evolution toward the humane in primates and evolution toward the humane in us as primates, I would have to say, I don't see it.
Hmm.
I don't.
This evolution toward the humane.
Toward the humane.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, we don't seem to be getting, it doesn't seem progressive. And if you look back at different civilizations, it's like they got to a certain point of humane behavior, treatment of
Some of
others
them.
in the world.
Yeah.
Some of them, but it's not like we just can, we build on that. It's like
No, no, we
we end
don't.
up in the same predicament over and over and over again.
Yeah. Lemmings to the sea.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's true. And I think it is due to our primate natures. Uh,
Like we just can't get over it.
can't. We have a
Mm,
lot of part of that primate nature, and this is my interest in primate ethology. Part of that primate nature, it's a suite of attitudes, behaviors, and so forth. And part of it is just beautiful. I mean, there's there's reconciliations and comforting and grooming and even cross species, trans species empathy stuff,
in
all kinds of,
collaboration.
yeah. But then there's this other part of the suite, excuse me, which is mean, tribal, uh, likes to cause pain, likes to kill others of other tribes, hunts ferociously. And there's this awful power struggle in chimpanzee society for positions of power
Hmm.
that leads sometimes to death.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's like, wow, we were doing that a million years ago, probably, documented to about 8,000 years ago, first mass killings that we know of, and we're still doing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether it's medieval, thinking, religious wars of the medieval times. It doesn't matter if it's in a modern guise, modern political guise. It doesn't matter what guise it's in. It just keeps going.
Hmm.
I don't want to be too dark here, but
Yeah.
let's do what we can, um, according to the opportunities given to us to be humane to each other as far as that's possible. And something or someone else has charge of the whole banana. It's not us.
Mm. What do you think it is that leads some people to rise up above the kind of pure primal instincts of self-preservation and all of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
What is that?
I think, I don't know, but I think we're born with temperaments.
Hmm.
We're not tablas rasas. We're not tabulas rasas. We're not blank slates as developmental psychology used to think we were. We're not. We're born primates, and we're born as individual primates with individual temperaments. So I think part of it is inherency. It's part of what is mediated by the genes, spiritual entities, whatever else, that goes into the making of who we are when we pop out of the birth canal. So I think, that inherent temperaments, maybe sometimes, well, there are certain cultural venues or milieus in which that emphasize
Hmm.
or value that and encourage it. Uh, and so nature and nurture,
Hmm.
how much can it be taught or trained? That's something people ask me all the time. And
Yeah, I
yeah,
know.
first of all, I don't know. But secondly, um,
If anybody knew, it would have been done by
it
now.
would have been done.
Right?
Uh,
Like, yeah, when people say like, well, how can we help those people be more kind of compassionate and aware and all of that? I'm like, give up that fantasy, first of all.
yeah, first of all, give up that fantasy. Is it true though that certain cultural milieus, contexts can encourage that? I do think that's true. Uh,
I
can
wonder.
Yeah,
Tell
well,
me an example, you know? It all seems to get corrupted at some
um,
point by the power
well, at some
hungry
point,
and
no, no, that's
mm,
true. I think it has to.
even those lovely Buddhists.
No, that is true. Yeah. I think small community
hmm
is about the best we're going to do.
Yeah, community accountability, I think, is really important,
Yes.
you know?
Um, Communities can become, of course,
Yeah.
warped, distorted, taken over, hijacked, etc. But I think that, well, groups of friends. I mean, that's one reason I really enjoy doing hosting and facilitating the weekly book discussion groups. Not making a plug for that, just saying that over the years we've become a community.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the people that didn't want or weren't up to or interested in uh, mm, the kind of vision that I'm describing about moving toward humaneness as much as possible, uh, self chose to no longer be a part of it.
hmm
But I think you're asking, where does it happen? Happens in bits and pieces and small groups, I would say.
hmm Yeah.
Anywhere from two to maybe 25, which is what we're programmed for, in our
hmm
evolutionary history, too. Groups of 25, maybe 50 people.
hmm
And you know that 50 people are not going to be harmonious and so forth. But beyond that, no. Uh,
hmm
I I love ancient Egypt, but in fact, I'm teaching a class on that right now, history of ancient Egypt. But I wouldn't want to have lived there.
Yeah.
Um, I love aspects of modernity, but don't want to be stuck in it. And this huge revolt against, among other things, modernity that is going on right now in the United States of America uh, is um, proof of the pudding, if you needed any, that large aggregates of human beings will self select under certain uh, psychological and cultural and so on pressures and diverge from each other. And they will. So, yeah, this is not ancient
Yeah.
Egypt yet, but ancient Egypt is and medieval times are not too far away from
Right.
what could happen.
Yeah. It's part of our genetic inheritance, all of
It
those
is.
different patterns and
Yep.
outcomes. Hey, I want to take a moment to speak with you about this channel. Currently, only 11% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I think those numbers are terrible. So if you're enjoying this content and you want to help out the channel, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. And if you really want to help out the channel, you can become a member of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon, which will give you access to early release of full ad-free episodes, plus access to the archive of the first 100 episodes of this podcast. It would really help me out and allow me to keep creating content like the interview that you're watching right now. Okay, thanks so much. Now, back to the interview.
To maybe put a close on, unless you want to keep going with it, put a close on our conversation about can we en masse become more humane?
Mhm.
I think of several things. that help me to accept that we can't.
Hmm. Yeah, good.
One is Jesus said, we get to the kingdom of heaven through the narrow gate,
Hmm.
parentheses, one at a time. The masses take the broad road to lostness, or you could make the word more virulent. I thought for a while that he was just in a bad mood that day.
Hmm.
Uh, I now see that, yeah,
Yeah.
if you change kingdom of heaven to humane, sisterly, brotherly love, absolutely the case.
That gate is narrow.
It is narrow. It is narrow.
And the
Uh,
holding area is small.
yeah, that's right.
Like you
That's
said,
right.
standing room only, maybe 50 people
Yeah, right. No,
at
it's
one time.
true. It's
Hmm.
true. I think another thing is something that a friend of mine said years ago uh, when I was in some state of agony about all of the long before the present election and all that sort of thing, which is not, it's just another one of those things in my
Yeah.
view.
Yeah.
But he said, not everything we're doing here is meant for here.
Hmm. What does that mean?
To me, that means a lot of us are doing stuff in this life that that is valuable up to a point in this life, but its real value is elsewhere, else when. Another dimension of reality. Not
Hmm.
everything we're doing here is meant for here. It's meant for larger sweeps of reality than this little narrow band that we're in, and larger versions of ourselves and others than we're
Hmm.
able to express in this little band. And Van Gogh uh, said, um, he said, this world is for sowing seeds. The harvest is not here. I think a lot of people who don't think that there's more reality than this uh, find those sayings nonsense. But they also find when they see their efforts here thwarted, stymied, frustrated, crippled, they become desperate because they
Hmm.
wanted to save the world, as I did many years ago.
Hmm.
And because this is the only reality they can acknowledge or believe in, to lose this one is catastrophic.
Hmm. Yeah.
But if you allow yourself to at least entertain the possibility of more levels of reality, more dimensions of reality in which we are too, have been, are, will be, whatever, then do what you can.
Yeah. You can relax a little bit
You
around
can,
the kind of urgency. And I think it relaxes the over-identification with the provisional self,
right.
that was born on this date and will die on this date, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I think, that kind of that limited view of ourselves leads people to act in very extreme ways.
Yeah. And that certainly was taught to us by modernity. There
Hmm.
is nothing that beyond what you can uh, uh, experience with the senses and the instruments that expand the senses, like
Right. And
telescopes and everything.
consciousness begins with my brain and ends with the death
And
of my
that's it.
brain. Hmm.
Yeah. And that does lead to a pressure cooker world.
Hmm.
If you're, you know,
Existential anxiety,
mhm,
profound, just bubbling, like roiling under the surface.
yep, yep.
Hmm.
Whoever dies with the most toys wins. Oh
Hmm.
my God. I've already lost big time. You know,
Yeah.
And um, so, as a practical thing, opening to the possibility of dimensions that are other or more than us in bigger ways, uh, as you say, it is relaxing.
Hmm.
But I also think it, for me, and I go through a lot of this in soul making. For me, practically, it's relaxing, it's exalting, it's joyful, it's more than hopeful, and it also, because of that, those feelings, I'm convinced that it's real
Hmm.
because where I feel the best,
Hmm.
the fullest me, and that's love and being loved, that's real. That's worth all the rest of it. Uh,
Well,
and
yeah,
what?
I say sometimes like that meaning makes the suffering bearable. Without the meaning, I mean, the suffering is just debilitating.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
And I wanted to
yeah,
ask you about this because, I mean, Soul Making, the book, it seems like, okay, you're 76, and I just got the feeling like, okay, I've thought about I've explored all these things throughout this whole like lifetime, three-quarters of a century, and before I go, I just got to get it out there, for my grandkids or for whoever wants to listen. But you're not coming down authoritatively on any one particular worldview. You're sharing your own kind of process of discovery, of playing with ideas that never get concretized. I
yeah.
really appreciate that, and it kind of, I think, could help open up some of that inquiry and expansiveness for other people.
Yeah, I really appreciate
Because
you saying that.
you're not trying to force feed someone like a new story or
Oh,
anything like that. You're saying
oh,
like, here's my story, and like coming up with my own kind of cosmovision through all of this wrestling process has been meaningful and helpful in sustaining.
yeah. I well, two things if I remember to say them. One is that I didn't have any consciously felt anyway sense of pressure or urgency in writing this. I just thought, oh, well, the last book I published, I self-published my book of lyrical illuminations at the thresholds of Elysium because people think they're allergic to poetry, and it is poetry. It's not sing-song poetry, but it's poetry. And then I thought, and that was a number of years ago, and had published some other things before then. And I just thought, well, you know, um, some of my students or fellow journeyers in the book discussion group, excuse me, have been saying, Doug, really, we'd like to see these stories of your psi experiences and spiritual experiences and so forth. I'd like to see that in written form. And I just thought, well, okay. I mean, um, there was a casualness about deciding to do this. And I just contacted an agent and he said, well, let's see what we can do. It was all like, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. It's okay if it does, it's okay if it doesn't. And it happened.
Hmm.
So that's one of the things I wanted to say. And that has actually been, Brian, that has been how I've lived my life. I have a thought, usually, is how I've lived my life. I've had a thought or an impression or a kind of a wish that just showed up, and then I kind of let it go, and then it presents itself as reality in weeks, months, or years, if it pertains to me. Like I wanted to be an astronomer when I was a kid, but I couldn't do the math, you
Hmm.
know. If it pertains to us, I think we, at least in my case, I haven't meditated much. I haven't concentrated as in Wicca. concentrated thought, concentrated wish. That may work for some people. It never has for me. It's just kind of hanging out. And I think of this, and years later, there's the opportunity.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the spirit in which it was written. And it is written to share. It's just to share.
Yeah.
I don't, as I say early on in soul making, um, I don't know what reality is. I don't know anybody who does, you know?
Hmm.
So here are some things that I've experienced. And then they're at the very least psychological facts that the spirit appears in the middle of a Zoom meeting in the central square of the meeting. And she's like uh, almost 200 years old. My great 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 grandmother, the Sioux princess, and things like that. It just stuff just happens, and I like, okay, well, that's interesting.
Hmm.
Um, and I just want to share as a fellow journeyer. That's all. You
Yeah.
know what I've experienced and what I've thought about those experiences, and see what you think.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I'm curious, like through that journey of the you know, Christianity, Judaism, Islam,
Islam,
all the peoples of the book.
right, and others, and
And then
others.
and then through everything else, yeah, that you've explored. I'm wondering like how has your concept of God changed over the years?
Oh, I do about a 10-page, 15-page take on that in the chapter on divine self-disclosures or God images. In one sense, I think it's always been the same, and that is experienced as if he, she, it were a finite person, finite meaning boundaries, but very, very big, but yet I could, someone that had my back and someone whom I loved and knew I was loved by, someone in various guises: Zeus, Athena, Amun, Ra of Egypt, Yahweh of the Hebrew tradition, and of course the Father Jesus, and many others. So, in a sense, it's always been that as far back as I can remember: mystery, wonder, awe, terror, uh, and yet always warm, intimate, personal at the same time.
Hmm.
And it's not like one or the other. It's just, but of course, as I talk about in whatever that chapter number is, uh, I pursued various pathways, you know, uh, Islam, as you say, but ancient Egypt and the Maya and Greek philosophy and mythology and Eastern stuff to some degree, and just a lot of things, and was impressed by differences and similarities between the different God images, and somehow felt provisionally, always provisionally, that that it is some infinite person who can self-finitize without losing his or its infinity, speaking to us, revealing himself, herself, itself to us in ways that we can hear, incorporate, and then yearn toward.
Hmm.
And so it was never a matter for me of this is true, that isn't, this is God, that's demonic, at least not in a simple way. Um,
Or
So
simplistic way. Yeah.
a simplistic way, yeah,
Hmm.
not in an
So it's
exclusive
like
way.
the many faces of God idea. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, but not just okay. So pick one or two or three. There was always a coherency to it for me too,
Hmm.
uh, which is why I'm not an anti-structuralist,
Hmm.
or a postmodern in that sense.
Okay, so
Um,
you're not even though your book's called Soul Making, you're not a follower of James Hillman.
I am not. No, no, no. I read his book on the anima,
Hmm.
and a couple others, but that was my introduction. I said, wow, there's absolutely no orientation here
There's no foundation to
whatsoever.
stand on.
There's nothing to, you're just swimming in this soup of stuff. And admittedly, okay, that is an experience we can have, but what,
We got to
you
get
know,
back down to differentiation
yeah,
and
right.
foundational. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know.
And no, I don't think that anti-structuralism is, I mean, they're trying to be democratic or whatever, all images are created equal or whatever, but they're, in my view, they're not.
They're not. No, no, you've got to have some kind of discernment,
Mm.
and like discernment, judgment, those have become kind of dirty words.
Yeah, but they
You
are
know,
necessary.
I
As
know.
long as they're done, as long as they're done, again, I think
Right.
as kind of provisional,
Yeah.
soft edge, not my way or the highway, heaven
Hmm.
or hell, right, wrong. Um,
As
yeah,
long as it's like everything's prefaced by for me
for
instead of
me.
for everyone, right? For
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, I do that a lot in the book, I think,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like you end it with like, okay, so all of this exploration of all these different things, like what is the afterlife? What are spiritual entities? What are demons?
Right.
What is God? All this stuff. And then you're like, okay, my summation is, and it's entitled A Likely Story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's the Plato thing, where in his
Right.
dialogues where Socrates is trying to reason out things with various interlocutors, and he gets to a point where he he says, well, he has to start speaking. The one example is he has to start speaking mythological or poetic language because discursive language and thoughts just can't go any further. And the really fun thing that in some of his dialogues is his interlocutor will say, in effect, do you really believe that? When Plato slash Socrates is told a myth,
Right.
you know, a story, it's supposed to be an evocative of what we cannot speak kind of thing. And the interlocutor will say, do you really believe that? And he says, well, it's something like that, or it's a likely story.
Hmm.
Uh, and, and as I say in Soul Making, there are two ways to take that, at least two ways. One is, oh, a likely story in that tone of voice, which means not really very likely, but whatever. Or very likely story. It's very likely something very much like that, but I can't put words to it adequately.
Mm. I also think, well, it's a story. I like this story, like the myth of about the soul's descent and how we
Right.
come into this life with a character and a fate and all of that. Um, I go, well, that kind of works for me, as a
Right.
framing
Right.
device for my life and what seems to be an inheritance from a past life or somewhere else. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's a likely enough story. Like it's a good enough story,
Yeah, likely
it'll carry me
enough.
for a while.
Right. And as if or good enough, as long as we don't get rigid about that.
Yeah. Hmm.
You know, that's where
Yeah,
I'm
like
at.
Yeah, that's one of the things, I was going to ask you, because you talked about, trying to open or help your congregation open up to the mythological or metaphorical
Hmm.
meaning of the Christian story and finding a lot of resistance there or disinterest. And
Both.
now, yeah, both. Nowadays, there's people like Jordan Peterson and Jonathan Pageau talking about the metaphorical, symbolic meaning of the Christian story. And I think that's great, but at the end of the day, particularly Pageau, he's still a fundamentalist Christian. Like
Uh,
he's saying, yes, this is a symbolic story, but it's true actually. It happens to be true
it's
as well.
historically true.
And
Yeah.
it is if it's going to be a provisional story, it's the best story to live your life. And I'm like, oh, you just lost me. I
He
thought
just
we had come so
yeah.
far.
Well, actually, Augustine, whom I don't
Saint
like,
Augustine.
Saint Augustine,
Mhm.
if you want to give him that title, okay. Uh,
I know I have a
that
problem with that too. Like, but yeah,
yeah, no, I know,
yeah.
but whom I like old Augustine better than young Augustine because he mellows a bit, gets a little softer around the edges as
Mhm.
an old man, as hopefully a lot of us do. Obviously, not all of us. But he basing himself on what is ultimately the Stoic interpretation of Homer. This is where this first comes up. Is it literally historically true? Is it morally ethically true and doesn't have to be literally true? Is
Mhm.
it metaphorically true and doesn't have to be literally true, and so on? Started in the ancient Greek Stoic movement because, well, that's a long story, but they were getting hammered for not believing in the gods, in the same way that just like I was hammered in the churches for not believing in the, and so they said, well, no, I mean, literalistic belief is okay too. It should be provisional and only one of the levels of belief, all of which are valid. And Augustine, uh, being the devotee of pagan philosophy that he was, especially Neoplatonism, which absorbed Stoic stuff, Augustine gave Christianity the gift, which was largely rejected. Uh, Not at first and not by everybody, but over the centuries of, you're a Christian as long as you accept the stories at one or more of these levels.
Hmm. Hmm. I don't know if I want to be claimed by the Christians just because I see the symbolic or metaphoric
No,
truth of
no,
the
no, you don't
Christian
have to be.
stories.
No, you don't have to be.
It still
Uh,
seems one of those kind of Catholic universalist
yeah, I know.
moves, like, hey, look, even if you think there's symbolic meaning, that means you're a Christian, whether you
Yeah, I
like it or
know.
not, bub.
That may have been what Augustine meant. That's not what I mean.
Gotcha.
I
Yeah.
I mean, but if you may not have to give up the literal. If that's for you, that's for you. But at least add on some of these other larger perspectives. And once you move to those, I would say, in a certain way, higher ways of thinking or experiencing, not
Hmm.
just thinking about, but experiencing the divine reality. Um, that's where you can connect with others who don't
Yeah. Right.
accept your literal story. Uh,
Yeah. Like the mystic is at home in any church
mhm. Right,
because they
right,
can connect to the understory.
right.
Right? And you go, well,
Yeah.
yeah, this is just their way of connecting and participating in their version of creation.
Yeah, as I used to say to my churches or semi-literalistic students when I was teaching for 20 years in the Emeritus Program uh, at Oakton College, and they would try to set up an argument. I would say, well, I don't know if it's historically true or not that Jesus rose from the dead on the third day. If it is, I'm okay with that. If it isn't, I'm okay with that. because whether it happened in history or not, as something that CNN or somebody could tape, it happened. It happens.
The story happened, is
Right,
happening. Hmm.
right. And
And
it,
it's had a
it
profound effect on the world.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. The story is about a psychological, spiritual truth that good is defeated by, seems to be defeated by evil, and rises, good does, triumphant
Mm.
on the other side of that. And that's not just ideas. For me, that's actually my lived experience too.
Right. It's kind of like apparent when you
Hmm.
observe not only history, but the nature around you.
And the nature of the psyche,
Hmm.
you know, as a therapist yourself, you know, I'm sure you've seen people for whom that actually they lived that. They 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 died and were reborn, to put it
Hmm.
in, initiatory language. They grew, they moved to a new configuration of uh, a, a, as bigger and more, I don't want to use the word functional, but it is functional too, but more whole, more. So
Hmm. Like a
we
greater capacity, I think of it
right
sometimes,
to be
right?
human.
Yeah.
Hmm.
If they can persist through the difficult times, through the dark
Right,
night, through,
right.
and so what is it that allows us to persist? I think it's those bigger stories.
Yeah, I agree.
It's the only
Yeah,
thing I can ever like figure out. It's like, well, if I didn't have this concept of myself in the world, I don't know if I would have made it through that passage,
right.
right? In
Yeah,
order to experience the rebirth.
yeah, yeah. The 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 broader, deeper, higher, wider the contact with what I would call ultimate reality, capital R, which for me is divine, God, etc. The richer and deeper the contact, the awareness, the with that, the more we can relativize most of the time anyway the dark passages.
Hmm.
We suffer them. We suffer them and we suffer terribly.
Yeah.
Um, but but with that, that's a way in which I think all my work in a sense, um, primal love for couples and the shaman secret, the Maya stuff, and at the thresholds of Elysium, and now soul making. It may not seem practical to be a mystic,
Right.
and I don't mean woo woo. I mean aware of other and higher dimensions of self, and self with a capital S,
Right. Including the
in
world. Hmm.
right, in which we live and move and have our being. Uh, uh, Closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Um, what was I going to say? I was going to say that,
Well, how mysticism can be
yeah,
practical.
that experience, as you alluded to, I think a while ago, does have a practical impact on your life,
Hmm.
my life, everybody. I mean, it isn't just airy fairy or something nice to think about.
It's been so denigrated, right? Like airy
Yeah,
fairy, woo woo. It's like
yeah.
it's a trifle. It's navel gazing.
Mhm.
It's self-absorption, and
Right, right.
but
Yeah,
it's like it's life-sustaining.
yeah. It is. It is life sustaining, and it is transcendence empowering. And by transcendence, I don't mean in a simple way escapism, although I don't blame anybody who wants
Hey, a
to
little
escape.
vacation from
A
this
little,
reality every now and again is well
maybe,
deserved.
an extended vacation sometimes too.
Well, that's coming.
Um, right. But that's coming up, right? But it yeah, it's a psychological function, transcendence is that lifts one, and that's Jung again too.
Hmm.
If you want to stay at that level, you know, it's an inherent part of being human, I
Yeah.
think, and it allows us to be more fully human, not less. I mean, it is true that
Hmm.
people can retire into woo woo. That's
Yeah.
true, and discount the importance or the urgency or intensity of this world and
Right.
who
The,
they.
the embodied biological
Mhm.
life and relational life and all of that. Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
And that's getting for me. That's getting the cart before the horse.
Mm. I
They're
think,
just
yeah,
leapfrog.
like if we have the capacity for transcendence, I think that somehow balances out this gift of self-consciousness,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because if it's only self-consciousness, then it's it's predatory narcissism. It's that
Yep.
self-preservation above all else, dog
Right.
eat dog, and all that.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if Trump has ever had a moment of divine transcendence, because if he did, his ego probably wouldn't be so caught up in the dog eat dog and the self-preservation and the, you know.
Yeah. And you're using Trump as an example, as an exemplar for many, 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 many others too.
Yeah, it just so
Yeah.
happens this is a week after the
Yeah.
big
This is the
US
week to
election,
think about
so
that. Right. Yeah.
Trump's in the zeitgeist.
Yeah. 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 Trump and travelers, Trump and company.
Mm.
And I don't think we would, yeah, I mean, there again, uh, a practical, I think about all the wounded people. Of course, because of the election, I'm thinking of the wounded people in this country. There are wounded people everywhere and more of them all the time.
Mm.
But I'm thinking of both sides. Not to get too far into the subject, but both sides are wounded,
Oh yeah,
or they wouldn't be so
one-sided.
one-sided.
Yeah.
There's I just this is now we'll go back to King War Magician Lover times.
All right,
Just
bring it
brief,
back.
if that's okay, just briefly.
Yeah, man.
Um, I remember early on, it's like 35 years ago. Um, Men were organizing to work on their father issues,
Hmm.
predominantly absent fathers, abusive fathers, etc., and the father wound. And I did a little bit of that myself because I had an absent father. It was my mother's choice, but I had an absent father. It wasn't his choice. Um, uh, but I thought, and I said in various kind of organizational meetings, I said, that yes, right, okay, just as long as we include the mother wounds too, people, men, many, I don't know if it's some, many, most, or whatever, men have no idea how deep and how corrosive and how vulnerable making as male identities mother wounds are. And I know I suffered that and overcame it through years of Jungian analysis and other things. Um, if you don't face the ways in which you feel threatened by dominating women, powerful women, let's say. I don't want to use pejorative terms because people are just people, and we have as much bonobo in us almost as we do chimpanzee. Uh, Not quite as much bonobo as chimpanzee, but it's there. Anyway,
Yeah, we don't resolve our conflict through oral sex,
no, we don't.
unfortunately.
We don't, and we are not hierarchy less. And yeah,
Right.
so
Yeah. So
but
not recognizing the mother wound.
yeah, yeah, leads to a unconscious, largely, I think, or maybe semi-conscious fear that if I allow a woman um, care of me, care of a nation, care of, I'm going to have to start on Viagra tomorrow. You
Hmm.
know,
Right. It's
there,
emasculating.
it's emasculating. It's
Hmm.
felt as emasculating.
Right. I must then, yeah, I must relinquish my masculinity because there won't be room for it in this
Yeah,
matriarchy,
yeah.
something
And,
like
and you
that.
know what? The
I mean,
terrible,
that's a valid fear because that would
yeah,
be one expression of a dominant or powerful feminine,
right,
right? Can like
right.
Marion Woodman said some of the worst patriarchs I ever met were women,
Yeah, yeah. No, it's true. It's true for me too.
right? There is a kind of devouring mother archetype.
Yeah, and
You
the
know,
political correctness stuff, uh, there is just as much, in my view, there is just as much that is being ignored or just not seen or repressed, let's say, as there is in the uh, knuckle dragger society.
hmm
Uh,
yeah, and it's just as authoritarian in its own
yeah,
way.
yes, it is. It's just,
Hmm.
and I've experienced that too,
Yeah.
as many men have, and I do worry about so many drug addicts are youngish, even middle-aged men. Why have so many middle-aged men been alcoholics traditionally? Why are they into methamphetamines? Why are they, and so many young, I know this because my daughter is 28.
Hmm.
I started a family late in life. And her stories about her dating life, and she would describe dances in high school, school dances. Uh, and I would say, honey, that's a dance. That's not anything like the dances that we did, where boys and girls danced together.
Hmm.
And there were slow dances, and there was, some romance and some sweetness and some, uh, no, it's just the boys over here, the girls over there, jiggling to
Hmm.
as raucous music as possible, not rarely dancing with each other. And I thought, okay, okay. And then I hear the statistics and I see in
Hmm.
her dating life the young men that are not going to college, who don't have a view of a place for themselves
Hmm.
in a feminist society, which has slots A, C, D, E, F, and G for women. I understand that.
Yeah. Women and a lot of other people.
And a
Yeah.
lot of other
Hmm.
people, but not them,
Hmm.
not young
That's
men.
real. It's real.
It is real. And it's like, okay, I understand how we got that way. We got that way
Hmm.
honestly. Okay. We're trying to make up for lost time. We're trying to correct the errors of history and
Trying to
so forth.
correct, right? Hmm.
Yeah. And we've overcorrected. And even
Hmm.
if we haven't overcorrected, the price has been at least two things. Well, it's three really, and more. Men who don't feel that they have a masculine role anymore,
Yeah.
who can't be heroes because the heroic is rejected
Hmm.
for honest reasons, but it's rejected. Uh, Second group that's paying the price are kids. With both parents working, the economy's been restructured. And I'm not saying anything against, really. I don't want to be misunderstood to be saying anything negative about women entering the workforce and being promoted to what I'm not. I'm just saying there are prices for everything.
Hmm.
There's good and there's a price for it. Children are prices. The price for restructuring the economy so that most families, two people have to work.
Hmm.
Who
Yeah.
gets left out? The kids.
Hmm.
And the third price that I can think of right offhand is that a lot of women, some men, a lot of women, while they would like to achieve X, Y, or Z in society and economically, are still drawn to creating families.
Hmm.
They want that. They want kids. And for many of them, not all of them. So I don't want you to get death
Not
threats
all
and
of
so
them,
forth.
but I know
But
some of them personally who would rather spend all day in the
yeah,
kitchen cooking than in some office emailing.
and with kids. I mean, what a
Yeah.
rich life that can be,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
And
as long as you, I think as long as you do have some kind of network support system community around you, because I think a lot of what women were responding to is the pressure of the kind of the nuclear family, the isolated family,
of
basically
course,
a single mom trying to take care of a whole household, which is,
yeah, yeah, and that is going on too, of course,
yeah.
because if you don't have romance, you have a meat market. That's all that's left. And when you get tired of the meat, you split.
Mhm.
So you have a lot of single mothers left with kids, and the guy, for somewhat honest reasons, push of nature, et cetera, has gone elsewhere to sow more seed, and so on. It's a mess
Well, even like not even if the couple hasn't split, kind of functionally, the woman
functionally.
can be basically a single mom, because
Yeah,
dad's too busy working trying to keep
yeah,
up the
right,
household payments
right.
and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mess.
Hmm.
Human needs are so complex, I think, both men and women's. And what I started out saying is that both sides in this are deeply hurt,
Hmm. Yeah.
deeply hurt. That struck me like a bolt. I mean, this is our election was race, gender, and culture clashes, and both sides, in a sense, is the pattern in human history. I think both sides trying to take as simple an answer, a simple as simple a way out as possible, and this
It ain't
isn't going to
simple.
work either.
I know.
What we've
Yeah.
done here now is that's not going to work either. Um, and I'm talking about apart from policies
Yeah.
and apart from personalities, um, our systems, because we are complex beings, we are
Hmm.
no way
Yeah.
out of it.
I mean, this is the thing I've been advocating for, from my safe distance up here in pastoral Western Canada.
Yeah.
What I've been advocating for is more of like Jungians taking their own medicine of watching out for one-sidedness and trying to
Right.
hold the tension of the opposites and increase their capacity for ambiguity and uncertainty, the likely story and all of that.
Yeah.
I think allowing for complexity. It's, I think, a response to that existential anxiety is to reach for the simple, sure answer.
Yes.
Right. And no wonder people are grasping for that because existentially, 75% of people are living hand to mouth in the most developed nations in the world.
Yeah.
So,
I was gonna say that I agree with you 100%. Um, the intervening factors, however, like putting food on the table, like surviving Hamas attacks and Israeli bombings, like surviving, you just name it,
Go down the list. Yeah.
go
Hmm.
down the list. Uh, those things are far more pressing than trying to fill out as a human being. You're just trying to
Yeah.
survive literally and trying to help your kids get through. Not even necessarily to a better world, just get slide sideways,
Yeah.
make it out of this alive.
Hmm.
And um,
Yeah. It's like, you know, of course, people are going to be focused on like the kind of bottom level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, food, shelter, water, survival. But at
don't
the
forget
same,
meds.
yeah, but at the same time, if we don't reach toward the transcending the small, isolated, alone self, we're not going to make it through the difficulties of survival. And so
I
to me,
agree.
it's like not a progressional kind of going up the hierarchy. And as long as I can take care of the base needs, then I can focus on my
Yeah,
self-development or spiritual needs. I have to be
yeah,
doing all that
all of
consecutively.
it.
And which
Mm-hmm.
is why I think like I've recently found out that Maslow was inspired for this model, hierarchy of needs, by his study and time with indigenous populations in Canada. And the thing
Boy,
is, though,
Canada.
about the indigenous populations is they work with the medicine wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is contained with a whole. Everything
Mm-hmm.
is co-emanating, coexisting. You can't have one without the other. And then
Right.
Maslow comes along and puts it in a pyramid, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's something's lost in that that I think
Something's
is
lost. Yeah,
essential.
yeah, yeah. The medicine wheel, and I have not that much knowledge about it, but thinking in terms of mandalas,
Hmm.
uh, the center, and this is, I don't want to go there because we'll be here another hour, but maybe we can do it some other time. But my favorite Platonist near contemporary just died in 2019, modern philosopher Stanley Rosen, uh, in his Metaphysics in Ordinary Language, does just an incredible, I think, is the most brilliant understanding of the present, past, present, future that I have ever read. This whole problem of time and eternity. But
Right.
anyway, we can't do that right now. But what I was going to say is that the present is is presence. There is no present. There is presence. And so I envision at the center of the mandala and extrapolate to the medicine wheel if it works. Uh, at the center, there is us as present. And because the center is outside of time, and it is outside of time, we are
Hmm.
at that part of us. And in a way, it's sort of what we've been talking about in different ways, I think, is uh, the center radiates the whole, or it is unpacked as the whole.
Hmm.
The wheel turns, at least the mandala can be said to turn. Uh, but it's turning relative. Our lives are unfolding, and the aspects of who we are unfolding at different stages of life, but always present because we are present as the generator of all of this, both we with a small w and large we,
Hmm.
uh, the transcendent part. And so, yeah, I mean, I wonder if, I mean, it's hard enough to try to move consciousness forward in relatively well off societies like our own.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to do that with starving raped, uh, uh, castrated people in Darfur.
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, and that's where the salve, the balm of compassion has to be applied,
Yeah,
right? If you are privileged enough to have awakened to the bigger picture, the deeper reality, all of that, if you're comfortable enough that you can focus on that, you can be reading books about mythology and soul making and Jung and all of that.
yeah,
Uh, Without the compassion, again, it's locked in kind of a
yeah,
self-serving mode. Like, yeah. So, I mean, that's really what I've been advocating for is for those of us who are able to see the bigger picture, to try to be like really inclusive and quit with the them or us
mhm,
language, the othering, the demonizing of the other on both sides that's happening.
yeah.
And it must end.
I don't know if it must.
Well,
It
it will.
should.
It will either by
Oh, I see
of
what you
our
mean.
volition, or it'll be the end
Yeah,
of the civilization, right? And then
yeah,
it'll start up again in some new way.
yeah. I don't know whether civilization will survive or not. And in a way,
Well, just accept that it won't.
yeah, except that it won't. And what becomes important? It's not your legacy. It's not your what gets carried on forward in the horizontal level. It's who you are now.
Hmm.
That's what matters. Uh, the best that you, the most integrated, the most whole, the most, as well as you, any of us can apply the balm,
Hmm.
as you said, to each other now.
Hmm. Yeah. And the thing about that is, it may seem limited in its scope, but the interaction that can happen between two individuals brings with it everything in the past and possibly keeps echoing deep into the future. I mean,
Yes.
you can remember times in your life where there's some interaction, a few words said to you, a touch, a
Mm-hmm.
gaze that has
Mm-hmm.
stuck with you and deeply imprinted itself on you.
And even if there are no succeeding moments, no future, that in itself was worth everything.
Mhm. Yeah, that could be, if at the end of end of our time, uh, our heart is being weighed on the scales of good and evil, it could be the thing that just tips it in a particular
Yeah,
direction.
that's right. And whether there, I do believe in, worlds beyond this one, not planets. I don't mean in our universe. I mean elsewhens and elsewheres that we're part of, uh, that are making us and we're making. Uh, Regardless of what that is, and in an ultimate sense, I don't care. What is meaningful for me is right here, right now. Um, that this act right now of love,
Hmm.
whether it echoes in the future, or echoes in other realms, or whatever, it in itself is its own validation.
Yeah. Well, isn't this the idea of the kingdom of heaven
Mhm.
is here? Like
Right
if
here.
you want it, if you allow it.
Yeah. Yeah. If you allow it. Yeah. If you can, if you have ears to hear and eyes to see,
Mhm.
which is
Yeah.
easier said than done. But,
And if you love another as you hopefully love yourself.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's both of that. Uh,
First, you got to learn how to love yourself before you can love.
yeah. And so how are we gonna therapize 8 billion people?
Yeah.
You know, we're not.
If it
But
was
but
possible, it would have happened by now, right?
right. but what we, and I don't just mean you and me and so on, the elites of the Western world and so forth. I mean, everybody, I mean, when I lived in Israel, and just tiny example, when I lived in Israel, uh, there was a old Hasidic Jewish man sitting on a series of winding steps in a neighborhood, and a little Arab boy. The little Arab, I don't making not making heroes out of anybody, just giving an example. A little Arab boy fell down the steps. He was probably 2.5 years old, just scraped up his knees and bloody. And okay, the Hasidim and the what's became Hamas and Hezbollah and so forth, so hateful toward each other. The guy, the old Hasid, comes up. He comes down the stairs. He takes the boy, he carries him back up. He gets some water. He bathes his wounds, and I thought, wow, well, that's a moment for the ages. Um, and uh, and I see in bombed out hospitals in Gaza. And I'm not saying this from a purely moralistic standpoint either. See the little boy sitting in his blood and blood, and people are going either side of him, rushing to help somebody, and they don't see the little boy. Finally, and he's just like reaching out, and it's just the whole thing is just incomprehensible and a horror for him, of course. And some random young man finally notices him and picks him up and carries him somewhere to to help him. Whatever happens, that is that act is saving a human soul in that moment, even if they both get blitzed the next
Hmm.
5 minutes. The act was done. It happened. It was love. Um,
Hmm.
I'm really sensitive to that stuff because when our granddaughter was born and her parents, 3 months, have let them be at home with her, they were going to, they had to go to work. They're going to put her in a daycare center. I saw, I mean, this would go for any kid, but this baby was so alert and so sensitive and so joyful. I was 74 years old and I said, no, I'll do it. I can't. I can't allow that to happen to that
Hmm.
little soul. I took her and I cared for her for 10 months, from 3 months to 13. And while we had our own daughter, there was something about the bonding with her and her with me that has made, I now see that animals are childlike. I now see them as children,
Hmm.
uh, in very real ways. I can't stand to see what human beings are doing to each other as adults, but especially children. It's just,
Hmm.
how did we get on that? We got on that by stories of right now, right here, this.
Hmm.
No matter what happens to the universe, no matter what happens to the world, this act of love.
Yeah.
I know that may sound, I don't mean it at all in a Pollyannish way.
No. No.
And
No.
I know you don't.
No. No. There's nothing light or superficial or flippant about it. I mean, like those stories that you told, those to me are examples of people choosing humanity over
Yeah.
nationality, ideology, whatever. And like the guy picking up the little boy said, it's like a soul was saved. Well, I would say maybe two souls were
Two
saved
souls. Yeah.
on that
That's
day,
true.
right?
That's true. Yep. Yep.
And just thinking about what you got from taking on the care of your granddaughter.
Two souls were saved.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
And that to me, like that is like the heart of what I think of as soul making. What we're here for.
And oh, wow, that's great that you said that and that you said it that way. And I think that is the message of soul making.
Hmm. Hmm.
We make souls not to become kings or warriors or magicians. We make souls to become lovers.
Hmm.
And it doesn't matter what else happens or doesn't happen in one sense. In an
Hmm.
ultimate sense, it's, I, I say, why, and it's in At the Thresholds of Elysium, uh, the poetry thing. Why, instead of nothingness, has a universe been unfurled?
Hmm.
Because there is nowhere to meet except within a world.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And it's that universes are made for.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a good enough story anyway. Like, to think that a creator created this and created us to be the appreciators of the
Mm,
creation and to reflect that back through songs of praise and
yeah.
gratitude and
Yeah.
artworks and acts of love, so that creator could sit back and go, ah, they're finally
Yeah.
getting it.
Hmm.
What I
This is,
meant by all this.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good enough story for me, man. So
Yeah. All right.
thanks a lot, Douglas. It's been really great to chat with you, man. We've gone
It,
pretty far and wide and deep, I think. So
yeah, I've had a
good
great time. It
stuff.
was wonderful talking with you, Brian. And um, yeah, this was a moment too
Hmm.
for me of
Hmm.
sharing and joy and humaneness. Uh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I do this, have these conversations. And when it actually works out that we can have an actual meeting, you
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
it's food for my soul. And so,
I too. Yeah.
yeah, thanks for that.
Okay. Thank you
See
too.
you down the road.
All
Take
right.
care.
You too.